This is a William commander review. William tends to get overshadowed in the meta because you have commanders like Joan, Nevsky, and now Huo coming that are all so strong in the field. But at the same time, William does a very good job of holding his own in the field. Between his AoE buff and just the sheer amount of damage he puts out, and the mobility he has within his kit, he's a very underappreciated commander. So in today's video, we're going to go over his skills, typical talents, formations, and pairings that go well with him. Without further ado, let's get started. First, let's go over William's skills. William's first skill is a rectangular AoE, which is kind of unique. They can hit up to 3 targets with a damage factor of 1500. While this isn't as good as Joan in terms of total damage, it also gives a 30% march speed reduction, which is super useful for holding enemies still, and it makes him a common secondary commander in field hunting marches, especially Joan Prime. His second skill is a 20% increased attack and 15% increased march speed passively, which is excellent for mobility. In addition, off of Alliance territory, you get 10% damage bonus. Since it applies to troops led by the commander, it also means that 10% bonus will apply to Joan Prime, it'll apply to Nevsky, it'll apply to whoever else you put with William, which is excellent. His third skill is a 20% attack bonus, which is kind of but then a 10% chance to inflict a damage factor 800 skill, with a potential for an additional 400 depending on the number of surrounded enemies, meaning that you can get up to 1200 bonus damage if your enemy is surrounded by at least 5 people, on top of 1500 damage skill. This is where I think William is very underappreciated, because this doesn't have a cap, so he can hit people over and over again with this and do a lot of extra damage. His fourth skill is one that is typically not maxed, so you get anywhere from 10% defense to 20% defense based on the number of targets you hit. You get between 10 and 20 if you hit one target, and then you get between 10 and 20 and 50 rage per second for 3 seconds if you hit more than one target with that 3 target AoE. This is super useful, but it's typically left at 1, both because it's easy to get to 5-5-5-1, and also because the only thing you gain is just a little bit more defense, because you're going to get the same amount of defense if you hit one target or 2 targets, and you're going to get the rage per second at the same rate whether the skill's at level 1 or level 5. William's expertise just changes his third skill to be a damage factor 1000 and then up to 500. So instead of being a 1200, it becomes a 1500, and it bumps the attack up to 30%. So overall, it puts out a lot of damage and makes him deal a lot of damage out between his passive and his active skill. The only real downside is that he doesn't have any real defensive stats, and you will feel that occasionally in the field if you don't pick a great secondary commander, which we'll go over a little bit later, or primary commander in this case. Now that we've covered the skills, let's go ahead and go down to the talents. Now, the talents to me are not as big a deal, because the generally weak talent selection that William has means that you're better off leaving him as a secondary behind pretty much every commander. Because every commander you're going to pair him with either has the support tree, which is way better than the attack tree, or the skill tree, which is significantly better by several magnitudes. But if you want to use William as a primary and you're dead set on it, you can go to Rallying Cry and then go to Undying Fury here on the cavalry tree, or go down to Effortless on the attack tree. But generally, your options are very weak. So we'll kind of glaze over these because you're better off staying with whatever the primary commander is going to be for your talents. For formations, similarly, you're going to have the same issue. It's going to be based on what your primary is. If you're using a commander like Nevsky, Wedge is probably your best solution. If you're using a commander like Joan Prime, I actually recommend Echelon, because the 1.2 times factor, it applies to the defense buff given by William, as well as the damage buff given by Joan, allowing you to double dip into those buffs and get a little bit of extra value, while maintaining a lower stress level on your wedge formation armaments, because most commanders will use wedge formation. If you're wanting to do a hit and run, mobility based like farm hunting, you can also use triple line with Joan Prime again, or Cao Cao. But either way, it's really going to depend, just like your talents. It's more going to be about the primary commander than William, because he's often better suited being a secondary commander. Next, we'll talk about equipment. Overall, your equipment is pretty flexible. Since William is more a field commander than anything else, you don't have to have the top of the line gear. If you want to do farm hunting, for example, Windswept is great because you can get high mobility for relatively low investment. And it's between the 15% move speed bonus and whoever you pair him with. If they have hasty departure, if you have Windswept on them, you're not going to really get caught by any other players because the move speed is just so ridiculously high. But for equipment that's going to be standard field fighting, I would recommend just getting as much health and defense as you can. The typical set I use is the 2 out of 6 on the cavalry set with the troop health. But you can go to 4 out of 6 if you don't plan on doing the Season of Conquest items. But overall, the Ash of Dawn is a very good option. Navarre's Control is a very good option. But I use the boots and the chest piece from the Wasteland, and then eventually this weapon will, of course, become the Season of Conquest weapon. So that's about as far as I take the extent on my gear for William. And like I said, the focus for me is getting as much health as you can. Well, this set giving me 42% health and 32% defense, which is very useful for keeping him alive. Because overall, your focus isn't necessarily damage, because he passively deals so much damage, you don't need to stack attack. So when you stack defense and health, it keeps him alive longer for more of those high damage skills, and keeps more units alive for those high damage skills. For pairings, you have several options. Really, with the release of Woe, your options are going to be pretty much for the field cavalry any combination of the 4 commanders of Woe, Nevsky, Joan, and William. Personally, my preferences are Joan William for a mega support in the field, because the 2 of them complement each other very well. Between the rage gain, 2 of them you can actually get something like 200 rage per second for 2 or 3 seconds after a skill, making it very easy for you to recast multiple skills and just churn out as many of those active skills as possible, which then just gives a ton of support to your allies. However, if you are looking for a more high damage output, the new Huo or Nevsky will both be great options, just due to the fact they have such high damage and such high skill damage boosts. It'll make it really easy to put out a lot of damage with them. And the big pitfall about those commanders is they don't provide a lot of support to allies, so William fills that gap in support as well. So if you're wanting to put a support on each march, you can do Huo, Joan, and Nevsky William, or Huo, William, and Nevsky Joan. But really, any combination of those 4 commanders are going to be great, including William. However, with William, I do recommend you keep him as secondary, just because the other 3 commanders have much, much better talent selection. But with that, we'll conclude our discussion on William. I really think he's an underappreciated commander in the meta, and really with his damage output, he should be a lot more feared than he is. But what do you think? Do you plan on using William, especially with the new Huo coming out? Let me know in the comments. What other pairings do you think work for William? Let me know there as well. And as always, good luck, fight well, and I will see you on the battlefield.